I ended up proposing my car. They don't shoot on it last week very well.
I think we said something about the church too.
Yeah, good evening. Welcome.
Hi, ladies.
Colgate Rochester Crozer Divinity School. I am not sure how many of you were at the dinner and are coming down from that, or if you're making your way here for the first time. But either way, welcome not just to the school, but also to the lecture week. This is part of a week-long set of lectures that began on Monday, and we had just a marvelous time at Mount Olivet Baptist Church. And then Tuesday, we had an even more marvelous time at the downtown United Presbyterian Church. And tonight we've come home to have a lecture, though we just about run out of space, which is a good thing. We're always delighted to have a full house. And I just want to welcome you to our campus. Thank you for your interest in and participation in this lecture week. And I want to present the Popess. So her new book has just come out. Collection of Advent sermons that go back over the full stretch of her preaching ministry. There's one back there. And she asked me to write the foreword for it. And I was happy to do it because I wanted so much to affirm Barbara Moore in her preaching ministry, despite the fact that there are some persons in the Rochester area who are less inclined to support her in that ministry. So I hope that that person will get a copy of the book. But then when the book came out, she wanted me to sign a copy to her. And so, no, my book came out, and she wanted me to say something in my book about her. So I said, to the Popess, Barbara Moore. She is a dear friend and a wonderful colleague, and we're delighted to have her come now to introduce our guest speaker. Let's give her a hand.
You know, things happen in one's life, as Dr. McMickle said in his kind foreword, when God closes a door, windows open. And this school is a window of light for me, and I cannot. It's my privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, the Women's Advisory Group selected Edwina Gateley, and we're delighted you're here. Edwina was born in Lancaster, England. Mark, is Mark here? He was at dinner. He'll pop in. She was born in Lancaster, England, earned a teacher's degree from her home country, a master's of theology from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, and a certification as an HIV counselor in Illinois. Very interesting in light of what Dr. Bozek said the other night. From 1981 to 82, she lived 9 months in prayer and solitude in a hermitage in Illinois. In 83, she spent over a year on the streets of Chicago, walking with the homeless and women involved in prostitution. And in 1983, she founded Genesis House, a home of hospitality and nurturing for women involved in prostitution. Marge will have them down here tonight or tomorrow after the lecture. One thing that you may not know about her is that she founded the volunteer missionary movement, recruiting volunteers to accompany the poor in countries around the world. And you get a sense today of the needs around the world that are so striking. So it's a pleasure to welcome her to reflect on our theme, the exploitation of women.
this on, it makes a funny noise. You heard that? So, good evening. Happy to be here in Rochester. Okay, testing. How's that? Can you hear me? Is that all right?
Yes.
I really feel a little bit lost behind that podium, so I hope this will work. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The exploitation of women. What did I know about that when I started walking the streets of Chicago 30 years ago? I wasn't there because I was particularly interested in women or women's issues. I was there because I had spent the previous 9 months in a hermitage, living in solitude, and praying to God to show me what I must do with my life. At that point, I was trying to be open. I was trying to be available to whatever God would ask of me. I was saying to God, here I am, send me. The problem was, God did. God took me seriously. And the call I eventually heard was, as we would say in England, over the top. Much more radical and ridiculous than I ever imagined. I have come to believe that God is an opportunist and takes advantage of us when we are at our most vulnerable and open and naive. I was seized by the issue of women in prostitution and became a very clear and urgent call to respond to that issue. I had no idea what I was doing. I think God did. Yes, God had taken advantage of my openness and my naivete, but surely these women were the worst of the worst, the fallen, the seducers, the tarts, the hoes, the tramps, the criminals, and the sinners. Such have been the definitions of prostitutes since the beginning of recorded history. Since Eve first brought down the human race by tempting poor, spineless, innocent animals. The city of Chicago in a rundown neighborhood. And for those of you who know my story, you will remember my reception on the streets of Chicago. As I go forth in zeal and openness to reach out to the poor and the marginalized, not knowing really why I was doing it or what I was doing, but anyway, I had the sincerity and I had my belief in my call. And somehow I had to bridge this gap between myself and these hoes, and these tarts, and these criminals, and these sinners. So when I first met a group of women on the streets of Chicago doing their thing on the street corner, seducing our poor men, our middle-aged men, and I knew that I had found the ones to whom I was called, and of course I went up to them and I said, hello. And again, for those of you who know my story, you will know my reception. And you're all adults, so, you know. you're not going to be offended, right? And these women turned to me, and after my hello and hi, and said to me, F off, fuck off. And it was like, it was such a shock to me, so I did F off. That was the end of that ministry. You know, you do your best, you go out, you reach out, you know, you want to love people, and they tell you to F off, so of course I went back to God. And I said to God, you know what you can do with your prostitutes? God, this great, big, compassionate God, who never, ever gives up on us, this great, big, compassionate God, who is forever scraping the bottom of the barrel, looking for idiots. Loose. Said, go back. Go back. And I did. I went back to the streets, I went back to the women, and I was roundly told by them again to F off again. And there's a whole story with that, but this is the place for it. But eventually, the women began to, I suppose, put up with me. I suppose, I mean, they obviously thought I was a bit weird. First of all, they said, you're a cop, ain't you? That's why you're here, because you're a cop. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not the cop. You journalist? You writing about us? Are you writing an article about us? No, I'm not a journalist. Hey, you be a nun? No, eventually they accepted me at least to hang about on the streets. And they were definitely, you know, not too friendly at the beginning, and I came to understand why eventually. Let me tell you a little about the first woman I met on the streets. I tripped over her on the sidewalk, drunk, high, out of it, 23 years of age, and you know, everything in you, you know, all our teaching, you know, this is, you're the Good Samaritan, you know, you want to be the Good Samaritan. And you look down and you see somebody who is drunk and out of it, an addict, a prostitute, a drug addict, homeless, the whole thing. You can't stand there and say, this is Jesus. It isn't Jesus. It's Dolores, and she's drunk, and she's high, and she's a mess, and she smells. But at the same time, I knew that my call was to try to understand why you're doing this. Why are you living like that? I mean, when people call you a hoe, and a tart, and a tramp, and a criminal, and a sinner, you know, why do you keep on doing this stuff? And maybe, all right, okay. And I said, you know, you could go back to school. I mean, think of the opportunities. Think of the doors we can open, for these poor people who are down here. And so Dolores, in the first week, was like, oh, okay, you know. And I felt, this is it. This is what we have to do. You see, we have to help people change their lives, help people turn around. But after a week, she's gone. Back she goes, back to the streets, back to the diminishment, back to turning tricks, back to alcohol. And I said, oh, why? Why didn't she accept and receive all the possibilities for new life? So obviously, being a good Christian, I went out looking for her, and I found her in a tavern, drinking with this guy. I said, you know, you don't have to do this. Come on, I'll help you to start a new life. Okay, so back she comes. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this went on for 3 years. She's in, she's out, she's in, she's out. She's in. I'm saying to myself, why doesn't she turn around? What's the problem? You know, are you wasting your time? You know, how come God gets us into these kinds of ministries, with the you know, the very wounded, and it's not working. It wasn't the little prostitute that was getting exhausted. It was the disciple of Jesus 7 times. 7 times. You know, and it was life? Huh? Why don't battered women leave their abusers? Huh? Why don't hookers get off the streets? Huh? Why do we allow this kind of thing to happen? Why did she turn around? And as I put together her story, the story of this particular woman, though I've worked with many hundreds of women, but this particular woman, I came to understand why she didn't turn around, why she didn't receive the hand that was held out to her. Because her pain was too intense, and her wounds and despair were too deep, going back to early childhood and incest and rape that begins about 5 years of age with many of the women I work with. I discovered that 94% of the women on the streets of Chicago were first child incest victims. You know, well, if all you've ever known since even from the age of 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 or whatever is abuse and violence, you're going to see yourself. You are somebody who is unworthy, you're somebody who's dirty, you're guilty, you're certainly guilty in the eyes of the church. You're a problem, it's your fault, it's always the woman. And she begins to believe this. And so if you have zero self-esteem, the only way to deal with what's happening to you, you've got to get high. That's what the women say. We can't do it if we're sober, but they can't deal with that depth of pain that they've inherited through constant, often incest or abuse in childhood. So they stay high, they're on drugs. How are you going to break that down? But Dolores was not a tart, a hoe, a criminal, a sinner. She was a victim trapped in a cycle of violence, beginning with rape, molestation, becoming then a runaway. Our thousands of young children, young people, runaways, moving into prostitution, trafficking, and inevitably drugs and alcohol. So it's like I'm watching this, you know. I watched Dolores deteriorate, even in the face of my care, my concern, my love. I had to watch this woman die. I wrote a poem about it in my book about this period of time, and I just called it Dolores. Dolores, dear one, with your chewed up, over-kissed teddy bear stuffed in your pocket. Dolores, dear one, with your new young dreams trailing in bits behind you. Dolores, dear one, lumbering up the Broadway, drowning your despair in deep red wine. Dolores, dear one, don't die. Don't die. And she did. She did die. Like thousands of other exploited, despairing women. She was only in her mid-20s. When I was there, they said there were 75,000 of them. The Chicago prison. No, there's 75,000 of those hoes in the city of Chicago and environment around. You know. I began to realize I was facing enormous odds, standing over and against a huge system of exploitation that distorted, ignored, and covered up what was really going on. And that our own hallowed institutions were part of the cover-up. The justice system that defines and judged and did define and judge the women as criminals. The church that proclaimed them sinners, Magdalens. Society that saw them as outcasts and deviants. No wonder the women themselves saw themselves in that same way. I'll never forget this woman who said to me one day, hey, you want to know who we are? We're the scum of the earth. I said, no, you're not. You're God's work of art. In my tradition, you're God's work of art. Hey, Edwina, you want to know who we are? Quote, we're shit. No, you're not. You're the temple of the Holy Spirit. How can we move from this vision so that they can move from being scum to the daughters of God? We're the temple of the Holy Spirit, God's work of art. And I began to see, to understand, that's exactly what God wanted. That's how amazing God is. That God has these dreams which are impossible in our own human understanding. How do we do that? How do we shift and make this incredible, cross that barrier and help people to believe who they truly are? And it seemed to me that it was like God was pretty desperate. Like, oh, please, come on, tell my people who they are. Especially the most exploited. And I thought about Jesus and what Jesus saw and what Jesus did. I thought about the woman at the well. At that time in the gospel, Jesus wanders off. Jesus was always wandering off, right? So he wanders off from his disciples who went out looking for food and sandwiches and whatever. And Jesus is waiting for the disciples to come back with the snacks. And of course, he comes to this. She's going for water. She's going to the well for water on her own at that time because most likely, scholars tell us, she was the village prostitute. Nobody wanted to hang with her. Nobody wanted to be with her. So she waits until everybody else is away doing other stuff. And off she goes to the well with her container. And guess who's waiting there? Well, Jesus. And immediately she must have thought, he's oh my gosh, here's a guy. He'll probably try to pick me up. And Jesus, of course, as we know in the story, asks her for water. And the woman is horrified because Jesus is a Jew. And she is a Syrophoenician. Samaritan, you do not talk to those people. You don't talk to Jews when you belong to that other tribe. And as a woman, she should not be speaking in public to a man should not be speaking to her. And so here she is in this situation. And Jesus, of course, as you know the story, asks her for a favor, asks her for water. Do something for me. And she is shocked by this. Don't you know who I am? You're a man, you're a Jew, don't you know who I am? She was admitting that she was pretty well low down in the ladder. And of course the story is that Jesus eventually says, I will give you living water. And she's so excited, she drops her own jar, and she begins to run back to her village. What Jesus does is recognize, of course he knew that she was probably a prostitute. And of course she expected, as a hooker, to be put down, to be rejected. And what Jesus does is, from a different perspective, I will give you more than you've ever had. She becomes the first evangelist in the gospel. If that isn't empowerment of the exploited, I don't know what is. And of course this woman runs back to the village and says, guess what, guess what? And they must have looked at her and said, my God, who do you think you are, And she says, I've met this man and he told me everything about me, he knows about me. And they really had a problem because they knew that she was a woman like that. She was a prostitute. But there was something about her, you see. There was something about this woman who for the first time had heard the good news on a real level where she felt that she was okay. She was somebody. She'd been given a message, an important message. She'd been given a task. She'd been given responsibility. And because of, I think, some aura that was in that woman, the villagers said, well, let's go and check it out ourselves. So Jesus, a different perspective. Not accepting, society's definition, church's definition, his own people's definition, But seeing deeper underneath, that's what we must do with women so exploited that they are never able to accept their own inner potential. And of course, the Syrophoenician woman was another woman too, who, you know, Jesus had a different perspective, or he got a different perspective from the Syrophoenician woman when Jesus went away from his disciples because he wanted to have some space and because he was having problems with his family, his mother and brothers who set out to seize him. He was having problems with his disciples who did not understand what he was talking about. He was having problems from the Syrophoenicians and the leaders of the leaders of the people and the religious traditional leaders. And Jesus left and he went off to a place, Syrophoenician place. And there a woman saw him and cried after him, "Jesus, help me." And Jesus looked on her and saw that she was an outsider and refused to speak to her and said, "Is it right to give the bread that is on the table to the dogs?" And it was the Syrophoenician woman, the woman who was not accepted, the woman who was on the edges, who challenged Jesus. Even the ones underneath get the crumbs. And the wonderful thing about Jesus of Nazareth was his ability to listen to the other side, was his openness to be stretched to another voice, a different perspective. And Jesus said, "Woman, your daughter is made whole." So it seemed to me on the streets of Chicago that I had to try and see from that perspective. I had to try and see from another vision which probed deeper beneath the externals and beneath what society and culture was telling me. I knew that I had to challenge the system. I knew that I had to speak aloud and to share the stories of the women, their stories. I had to tell people what was really going on. I had to tell them about the brothel, the house where the women gather, the houses where the women gather, and where the men come in from their offices, from the city centre, politicians and teachers and accountants and judges and the sheriff in full uniform. Why is the sheriff in the brothel? Dead men's bones, whitewash sepulchres. Why is he in the brothel? Because he gets it for free. So it's like, you know, you begin to see this double standard. You begin to see the hypocrisy and know that we have to change that system. We have to be wise as serpents. We have to find out what's going on. We mustn't accept the labels without trying to understand how those labels were given and what really is going on underneath. I had to tell them about going to court where one of my women was being judged and the judge sent her to jail for prostitution and drugs. And she said to me later, "See that judge? And he's one of my clients." You know, and you know that really hurts. You know, how do you get out there to the public, the media, to take the veils from our eyes? If for years, hundreds of years, these veils have been there. I had to tell them about the meeting at one of Chicago's biggest hospitals, where we had this gathering of the hospital vice president and representatives from different agencies to try and work out how we could offer more medical help and health care to the very poor. And then we go to this meeting, and I'm sitting there, and the vice president of the hospital is sitting opposite me. And I look at him. And you know when you kind of think, I've met you before. And you know, it really bugs you. I recognize you. and you're just trying to get... And I said to him, I said, where have we met? He said, no, I don't think I know you. Oh, was it in the seminary? Have you been to the seminary? You know, and he was confident, you know, and dismissed. And at the end of it, I left the meeting at, you know, at the end of it, obviously, and then I began to realise. It suddenly came to me like that, you know, when you're falling asleep? And that's it. You know, he's one of the clients of the brothel. You know? So the judge sentenced the woman. The vice president uses the women. All the clients were white, almost all, white, middle-class, professional American men. You know, they weren't truck drivers or kind of, you know, these are respectable people. These are the people about whom Jesus talked in terms of dipping and spoons and whitewashed sepulchres. I had to tell them about the madame in the brothel on Thanksgiving Day. And all the guys come in and they use the women, you use $20, you know. And you get the women said, you know, and I really need to get a client today because, you know, my little girl, she needs a new pair of shoes for school, so I really need, and another woman, you know, I'm going to be evicted, you see, get evicted, so I've got to get a man, yeah. And that time, when I'm sitting in the brothel, and this guy comes in, and, you know, he looks around, and one of the women whose name was Rusty, she leaps up, and she says, you know, would you like turn a date, honey? Turn a date, honey? And she's performing in front of him. Then this guy looks at her, and he sees the track marks down her arm, and he pushes her away and takes another woman. And another guy comes in, and Rusty's up again, she's doing her thing, you know, trying to be accepted. Accept me, you know, love me, whatever. And this guy looks at her, pushes her away, takes another woman. And the third guy comes in, it happens again. She's not getting a date. She's not getting anybody. Nobody wants Rusty. And when the last one, the third guy does this to her, she sits back in her chair, she takes a book, and she puts the book in front of her face, and the tears are all running down her face. And I'm sitting there saying, well, what can you do? What can you do? And all I could do in that dirty place that day was, I put my arms around her, and I just hugged her, you know. Right from my little toes it came. I'm your sister, I care about you, I care about you. It was the first time I was sorry a woman was not taken in prostitution. I wanted her to be taken in prostitution because I couldn't stand the pain of her rejection, which she'd had all her life. These are real moral questions. They're real moral questions like that. But in the brothel on Thanksgiving, all the guys had gone. And the women had gone home to their pimps or their apartments or studios, whatever. And the madame and I are sitting together, and it's a regular townhouse, you know. They're sitting together, and it's getting darker. And you know that everybody's out having Thanksgiving, and that they're with the families, huh? And here's the madame. She's been in prostitution for 60 years. 60 years. And she sits there, and there's these potted plants around, you know, and it was such an intense feeling of loneliness. I could just hear the truck. Here we were, Thanksgiving Day, evening. Well, she puts her hand out to me, and she looks at me, she says, thank you for loving us. We are so lonely. You know, it kind of really, you know, broke my heart. We are so lonely. Of course they're lonely. Of course these exploited women are lonely. Of course people don't understand. Of course people reject. Of course people put them down. It's been like that forever in terms of prostitution. Of course you have to be happy. Of course you have to have drugs. How got these two issues run together, from incest to rape, to prostitution. That's all they can do. That's all they know. That's all I know. And zero self-esteem. So I started a program, as you probably know, for our exploited women. And they came. Over the years, hundreds of them. Hundreds of them. The battered, the beaten, the broken up daughters of God, looking for new life and hope. I'll tell you about just one of them. And her name was Messi. Messi was born in Chicago, orphaned, and sent to an orphanage. When she was in the orphanage until she was 8. And when she was 8, she was sent to foster care. And the other women, the older kids in the orphanage, said to her, "See, Messi, see when you get to that foster home, do what they tell you. Keep the rules. And if you keep the rules and you're good and you do what they tell you, then they'll keep you, and that's how you get to be adopted." So little Messi goes to this foster home, and in the second week, the foster father takes her into the bedroom, tells her to take her clothes off, and rapes her. She wrote years later in her journal, "This is what I thought you had to do to get adopted. I was following the rules. I was doing what I was told." Eventually, they were discovered by the wife, who came in and found them in bed together. The 9-year-old and her husband, and Messi was sent back to the orphanage in disgrace for seducing her husband. It's always the same. It's the woman's fault. It's always the same since Eve. It's endemic. Eventually, Messi was adopted and was fostered out again when she was a teenager, and she wasn't sexually abused, but she was physically used as a maid for labour, working. By the time she's 15, guess what? By the time you're 15, you're up to here with it, and Messi becomes a runaway. Joins the thousands of women, young girls, especially children, young girls, running from incest, violence, alcohol, drugs, abuse. Turns up at Greyhound bus station, which is where I was today, actually. This is running away from all the stuff. I mean, if that's all you've ever known, you're going to go out on your own to look. There's got to be a life out there, right? So she turns up at the Greyhound bus station, and guess who's waiting? Well, it's not the social worker, it's not, you know, the minister, it's the pig. The children of darkness are wiser than the children of light. And the guy sees her, you can pick them out. They've got knapsacks, They look like they don't know where they're going, they look a bit nervous, and that's it. That's where you go for it, right? Are you okay, honey? You lost? Where are you going? No, I'm fine. No. Well, do you know where you're going, honey? This is big city, you know? No, I'm fine. Well, are you sure you know where you're going? Where do you come from, honey? He's such a nice man, and he's so well dressed, and he's good looking, and he seems so kind. Listen here, honey, why don't you... Look, sit down. I'll get you a Pepsi or something. Would you like it? Are you hungry? Oh, okay. He buys her a Pepsi. He brings her a sandwich. And he says, look, you can't stay here in this station, you know. But, you know, why don't I take you home to my wife? And you can stay overnight with us, and then when you've rested, we'll arrange, see where you want to go, okay? Well, he's a nice guy. Off she goes with him. Nice house, there's the wife, nice woman. There's a bit of activity going on, but you know, she's welcome. Oh, hi honey, you okay? Oh, come on, we got a nice little bedroom for you. She moves in, and this couple are so kind. They're so good to her, you know. And the next day, you know, he takes her out. Buy me some, wear a new jacket. It's getting cold, you know. They look after her. They take her out. He takes her to theatres. He takes her shopping. Takes her to cinemas. All the time, building up a relationship. And he calls her baby. She calls him daddy. Daddy. And so it goes on for 3 months. This child, Mercy, is as happy as a clown. She's never been so loved. She's never felt so loved. She's never felt so valued until at the end of the 3rd month, the guy comes up to her and says, hey, who bought you that? Honey, you did, Daddy. Who bought you this then, baby? You did, Daddy. Do you love you, Daddy? I do, Daddy. Well, I love you, honey. I love you so much, but you haven't done a thing for me. Do you realize that all the stuff you've got that I got? Yes, Daddy, yes, you did. Well, don't you think it's time you did something for me? I'm sorry, honey. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. I love you. You know Daddy loves you. He's a pimp. He's so smart. He's a psychologist. Huh? Smarter than any of us. He knows how to build up a relationship. How to take the most vulnerable, the most exploited, and the most naive, and slowly, slowly, slowly get them to depend on him. He's the only one who showed any love. That's what the women said to me, Edwina. I know it beats the shit out of me, but he loves me. You know, you've got these contradictions. You know, how they expect to be beaten up. That's all they've ever known. But see, he loves me. And that's what we have to understand about exploitation of women, certainly in the sex trade, trafficking, prostitution. The woman, the girl, wants to be loved. And this is the only guy who's because he's playing her. He's playing. So, next thing is, well, I've got a couple of friends of mine coming around tonight, okay? And I went to stay with them. Honey, you do that for Daddy, won't you? You love your dad? Yes, Daddy. Yeah, sure. Of course she has to do it. That's her Daddy, and he loves her. He'll do anything for her. Time and time again, story after story after story. We have to begin to look deeper than we're looking now. The despair of these women is far deeper than I could ever have imagined. So then begins a life of prostitution. And it's 20 years later. 20 years later. There's a knock on my door. And there's Mercy. She's had enough, you know. 20 years of prostitution, drugs. And she moves into the program I was running then in Chicago. And, you know, she was so smart. She should have been a professor. She should have been in a place like this. She was so smart, so intelligent, so bright. And after a while, you know, she was doing so well. She wanted to recover. She wanted to start a new life. She'd had enough. And I asked her to go down and buy some. We needed some bread or milk or something. So I gave her $10. Say, let's go and get me, you know, a gallon of milk and whatever. So off she goes. And I $10. And she comes to where there's a junction, you know, and it's, you know, stop, go, red light, green light, etc. She's standing on the street corner, waiting for the lights to change to green. In the only way a woman who's spent a life in prostitution knows how to stand. She doesn't know, she doesn't have any other way to stand. This is it, honey. Doing that for 20 years. And along comes the paddy wagon, a police van. Recognizes her as wanted for old warrants, suspicion of prostitution, solicitation. Hey, come on, Mercy, in you get. And Mercy is dragged off to Cook County Jail. I got a letter from her. I'm waiting for my $10. Where's she gone? And I'm thinking she's run away, she's gone. But she hadn't, she'd been arrested. And this is a letter I got from her 2 weeks later. Here I am, sitting in familiar surroundings. jail. Well, maybe when I get out, the world will have changed. But maybe I'm here because the God you tell me about believes in me. Maybe this God is saying, I don't make no junk. My daughter's rusty, has a few holes, and she needs a lot of work. So I'll send her to the shop, jail. I'll lead her to heal herself. She's beginning to see that maybe God said, look, in jail you'll have time, you can think about your life. You can reflect on your life. We would go to a retreat centre, right? But this woman is able to say, maybe God allowed me to go to jail so I can look at my life. I can't afford to feel comfortable. Edwina, for me that's accepting my dope mentality. I need to look at my life and see where I'm all screwed up. But I also need to let the positive things I've done soak in and become me. If I do this, I won't keep thinking of myself as worthless and negative. I'll see me as you do. You believed in me, and I tried. Someday, I'll believe in me too. I'd hate to die here in jail or face down in some cooker of dope. But if I do, remember that I knew you loved me. When you're young, you trust in your parents. I had none. I trusted in the dope man, and he failed me and left his legacy in my blood. AIDS. My life has reinforced my disbelief in me. Please don't let my failure stop your work. Remember, I was 38 before I met you. Take care of our dreams to fight for women like me. Please, don't give up hope. This is a powerful jail, prostitute, tart, a whore, a tramp. A woman in jail saying, look, don't give up. To us, to people, us. You know, because she'd experienced love. And she knew that we loved her. That just because I'm not going to make it, or if I die here, don't give up. Keep on going. Take care of our dreams to fight. When you go out to give talks, carry our message to the people you speak to. Tell them that we are all God's children and that nobody was born into this world trying to be negative. And tell them that we all came with great expectations, that our lives will be happy and fruitful. So if they can't help us to recover and find happiness in life, please ask them not to hurt us. A few years ago, when I was in my house there, it was Christmas Eve. And our house was packed with women from the streets, the brothels, the bars, the jails. And most of them were black, with their kids. And there was such excitement, there was such euphoria in that evening because we had Santa coming. Now all these women, they all had signs of abuse. They've got, they've got scars, They've got no front, a lot of them have no front teeth because they get knocked out. A lot of them, they have ripped earlobes because the guys pull their earrings and rip their ears. So here are these women with all these clear signs of abuse and violence. And there was such joy. They were smiling, they were excited because guess what? There's a new thing coming. It's Christmas Eve. It's going to be the birth of the Christ. The good news is coming. and every single woman and every single child was going to get a present because Santa's coming too. And you know, there's such simplicity. When you've been raped at 9, you have an adult female body by the time you're 20, but psychological, emotional development of a 9-year-old. Psychological development is arrested, when real violence is done, like rape and incest. So you get these adults who are all behaving like teenagers and kids, waiting for Santa. And you see that, you know, Jesus would love this. Look at this, these are my daughters, you know. They're battered, they're abused, they've been exploited. But now they're experiencing some joy, some expectation, something new. And there, right in the center, sat Mercy. Mercy. In this big old shabby armchair, she's sitting there. And I'm sitting on the arm of the chair, and we're holding hands. And she had this big smile. She was a very beautiful woman. And I remember she squeezed my hand, and I'll never forget her words. Look. As she looked out to these women crowded on the stairwell, and their kids scrunched into this small house. Look, she said, look what we have done. We have gathered the broken-hearted, the exploited. We've told them who they were, the daughters of God. No matter what they had done, no matter what happened to them, they are the daughters of God. And that's the kind of faith. I think Jesus was like that. Jesus saw that and declared that to the Syrophoenician woman, the Samaritan woman, the woman of the well. He knew that inside, deep down, there is in every single one of us a bit of God. And no matter how deeply it's compressed or battered down, our task is to call it forth so that there might truly be celebration. The next day I got a call that Mercy had died in the night. And you know, I think, you know, why? You know? And we buried Mercy and went to organised a funeral, went to the funeral home, and there's the coffin. And there's Mercy. And she looked beautiful. I bought this turquoise silk suit from Goodwill. She looked lovely in it. But I'm saying to myself, why didn't God let her live, you know? And then I thought, maybe this great, big, compassionate God, knowing and understanding the deep, deep pain in God's daughter. Maybe this great, big, compassionate God, knowing that she was too bruised and beaten to continue, knelt down and scooped God's daughter from the ground to her bosom and took her home. And I'm saying, no, keep her here. No, keep her, because I haven't got that perspective that God has. They are mine. They are mine. And now it's time for you to come home. And I'm saying, I want to keep her. But before God took her home, God showed to her, look what we can do. Look what we can do. And here we are. Look at what are we doing? Here we are doing something. Here we are conscious. Here we are dreaming. Here we are longing for a deeper vision, a deeper understanding. Here we are daring to say, here we are, send us, send us. Here we are confronting the darkness, speaking the truth. Now more clearly, I believe, than ever before. Standing over and against the exploitation of our sisters all over the world. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Indeed.
you were talking about the prostitutes and the pain that they were in because of the lives that they had. Did you ever meet any prostitutes who came from an upper class, were well educated in a loving home, or even some who saw this as a way to make money as a business? There were no drugs involved, no alcohol involved. Did you ever met any prostitutes like that?
No.
No.
Well, let's. I've worked with and known women who've been graduates, who've got master's degrees from middle-class families, who may not have been raped or suffered from incest, but were women who told me that they were. One woman said, "I've never been hugged by my parents. I've never felt any affection. I've never been given any affection. I've done the right things. I've gone to college. But we don't touch each other in my family." So there's always something. There's something which, and this particular woman with a master's degree went straight into the arms of a pimp who trafficked her for right through, for the next 10 years before I met her. And she knows that her situation is different from the other women who've had incest and been raped, but she's very articulate, very well spoken, and highly educated, but she's given her life to prostitution. Not now, she's recovered now, and they see. But then these women are looking for love. It's the common denominator. There's absolutely no question about it. And all of us pretty well experience love. So maybe we don't know what it must really be like not to have it. But I have a time to tell you a quick story about that particular lady. Is that all right? Yeah. Her name was Heidi, right? And Heidi, she was beautiful, blonde, blue eyes, the whole caboose. And when I take these women on programs I run a retreat program for women in recovery from prostitution. And Heidi came to them and has been to my retreats. At the end of every retreat that I give these women in recovery, we have a ritual. And, we get together, we pray, thank you God for bringing us together and keep us sober and in recovery from prostitution, etc. And I said to the women, have anybody got any idea what we could do for a ritual? Anybody, because I like to get their input. And Heidi, a high-class call girl, who had been sent to, the brothel as well as escort services by a pimp, said, I have an idea what we can do for our ritual. Here we were on Lake Erie, and there's a beach there. And I was down there on that beach yesterday, and I see these stones. All the stones are on the beach. And those stones reminded me of what they do to people like me. They stone us, and they still stone people and women. In certain countries, women get stoned for being like us. And she said, I looked at those stones. They reminded me of being stoned, as she was herself, and I was too, once, being thought of as a prostitute. She says, I looked at those stones, and I saw that they had been smoothed out by the currents of the water, and that the sharp edges had gone. So why don't we go down to the beach and collect stones? And then we can bring them up to our ritual tonight, and we can put them on the altar, and we can bless them, and we can pray to God to transform these stones representing violence and hostility into blessing stones. And we can pray over them. They become prayer stones. And then we can take them back afterwards and give them to the girls on the streets, working the streets. And we can say, here, honey, take this stone. It's filled with the blessings of your sisters. And I'm going, gee. We all go down to the beach and we collected stones. And we got this basket and put them on the altar. And at a certain point in the ritual, Heidi, like a great priestess, raised her arms over this basket of stones and prayed. These women pray in ways I could never pray. It comes right from their belly buttons. They're so powerful. She's praying, God, fill these stones oppression, fill them with your grace. Transform them into prayer stones for our sisters. And the tears running down her face. Then she goes around and takes a basket to every woman and every battered, exploited woman in that group raised their arms and prayed for transformation. And then these women, they took their stuff. They took their, the stones back to Minneapolis, Chicago, handing them out on the streets. And I got a letter from Heidi a few weeks later. I think I might remember most of it. Saying, I gave my first Serenity Stone to one of my clients today. Heidi now works in the correctional facility as an advocate for battered women. So she's in complete recovery. I gave one of my stones to one of my clients today. She had to stand in court to testify against her abuser, and she was so scared. I gave her the stone, and I said, hold the stone. It's filled with love and blessings from your sisters. She held the stone while she stood on the stand in court, and she became calm, composed. She ended up getting her restraining order against her batterer. P.S. Here's another stone for you. You need nurturing too. She enclosed another stone. You know, I mean, now there's an intelligent, educated woman who's able to process that. Any more comments, questions?
Could you talk a little bit about the possible funding sources that you received for your retreat programs and other programs for rehab?
The question was to talk about funding sources for programs like
or how they were
program?
supported financially, your retreat programs and what the other rehab programs you might have had.
Yeah, well, initially when I began, it really was providential. You know, I would get $50 from some church or other, and I would get donations. I would go around giving talks and trying to get women's groups interested. Eventually I got support from the city of Chicago and eventually the federal government because they saw the work I was doing. But now my program for women in recovery, for retreat program, which is focused on ongoing sobriety, ongoing support and sisterhood. I raise funds for that personally because it's not a not-for-profit. I don't want a board. I don't want all these committees. I'm not that anymore. And I have my program is called Sophia's Circle. And when I give my own retreats in different parts of the country, I always ask for donations for my Women in Recovery retreats. And it's a small foundation, but you know, it's all women, and it's all women in recovery and prostitution. And I love them to death. And next year, I have two of my women coming with me to colleges to talk about their own experiences of exploitation and prostitution. Because I found that I was telling their stories, and then this one time I invited one of the women, I gave her some training in speaking, and usually when I've given a talk, people would come around and say, thank you very much, that was very nice, and, you know, and she came, I gave my little thing, and I said to her, now talk for 40 minutes, and then you talk for 20. Okay, so didn't she talk for 20 minutes? And at the end of it, I'm standing here all alone, and there's a crowd around my podium, because she's a power, you know, it's her life and it's her experience. So now I'm working on getting the women out into the public, sharing their stories of exploitation and trafficking, and it's a powerful voice. Yes?
Of the women that you have worked with, what percentage would you say have managed to escape and lead successful lives?
Oh, the women, how many of the women that I've worked with have managed to escape and lead successful lives? The women that came into my program, 90%, and I think that's because of the program. Fundamental basics that most started with those basics. And the major one is hospitality and sisterhood. It's not therapy, not at the beginning. It's creating a family. It's creating a home. It's having flowers in the house, not encyclopedias. You know, and the women use it. It's having a fridge where the women look at you, honey, you can just help yourself. I can get myself. Yeah. It's creating. When we create family and we create sisterhood and that bonding, you know, these women, they really come together. It's community. So my program has always been based on community formation. And then you get your therapy and you get your NA and your PA and all the other stuff. But without love, without family, without community, they will relapse, very possibly relapse. I've been working with the same women now for 30 years, some of them. 30 years. They're older now. They're in their 60s, for heaven's sake. You know, and they're still sober, and they're going around talking to other women. They're my leadership team. And it's because we love one another, because we have a family. This is our community. And our common denominator is exploitation.
Very good, thank you.
We've recovered.
Are you familiar with the drug courts, specialty courts, and what do you think about them?
The drug court? Well, of course, I don't agree with, you know, drugs being a misdemeanor. You know, I'm all into rehabilitation. I think to punish, you have to. Why are you on drugs? It's not why. Why does anybody start into drugs? Have with women in prostitution the same for drugs. Of course, that's not the tough stance, but it works. It's the one that works. Yeah, maybe this should be the last question. Yes.
Can you comment on how maybe global sex trafficking might touch your ministry, or whether your ministry is different for women that are trafficked internationally?
Well, I'm going to look at more of that tomorrow, I think. Trafficked women. But, you know, I've worked with trafficked women. And, I mean, there's this one who she was a travel agent in, where was it? Monaco or somewhere, some country in the Middle East. And an American came over as a tourist, and he lured her to the United States eventually, inviting her to get married and, you know, better life and all this kind of thing. And he brought her to Chicago and very quickly started showing her pornographic movies and beating her up and forced her out onto the streets. Her name was Aisha. And the police eventually picked her up. She was terrified and brought her to us. And what we had to do was to arrange with her embassy to get her back home. But she was destroyed, totally destroyed forever. I mean, the trust of going out to get married in America and going to live with this nice man who said he'd fallen in love with her and start a new life, and then ending up on the streets of Chicago. Trafficking, prostitution, street prostitution, brothels, it's all interconnected. It's all traffic.
David, I think tomorrow we're going, in part of our panel, we have a Beth Gerhardt from Northeastern Seminary, whose book is in the books and gender side, and it deals with local trafficking. So I think that will come tomorrow. That's here tonight. Just before our sister Debs comes down, I want to remind you the evaluation form is on your at the place. Tomorrow at 8:30 there's hospitality, 9 o'clock worship in the chapel, and Reverend Carol Barrett, one of our graduates, will be preaching. And we'll be here at 10 o'clock for phase 2. Oh, is that okay? So, I think that's all I wanted to say, and Deb,
Get Melissa down.
oh, Melissa has something to say. Melissa and then Deborah.
Hi, I'm Melissa Morrill. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment Services here at CRCDS. And just, you don't have to wait until lecture week to come meet with us. I just want to encourage you to take advantage of the resources that we have here. Even if you're not interested in a master's degree or a doctoral degree, we have auditing opportunities. You can take courses as a non-degree student or a certificate student. And we have courses that are relevant in terms of it's religion, but how does your faith intersect with these types of issues? So if you enjoyed tonight, I'd encourage you to stop by our table out here, and I'd like to talk to you more about how to take the class here.
Thank you. Let's go back to school.
I've never been to school, and I am an alumna of the school, class of 1987, a member of the Women and Gender Advisory Board. I'm also second generation alumna of the school. And all that, I think, gives me the opportunity to have the last word tonight. And that last word is to thank you very much. You've already heard about tomorrow. You have drawn us to the well in a meaningful conversation. We may have nightmares tonight, and we may have dreams tonight. But the conversation that God has engaged us in will continue tomorrow in more profound and more meaningful ways. And so thank you all for coming tonight and being part of this. Thank you so much for your leadership and guidance. And look forward tomorrow to a lecture, an amazing panel and reflection, and then an opportunity to share and worship together to put wholeness and hope into what we are called to do. Let's go forward.
You're going to take classes. I first